The door to Section 12 opened with a sound like a lung exhaling, and Marcia walked through it, carrying a notebook and a dead recorder battery. She had replaced it twice already. Something about the electromagnetic signature of the station interfered with human electronic chips in ways the Vendry hadn't bothered to explain, and she hadn't bothered to argue about, because arguing with the Vendry about anything was like arguing with a glacier. Technically possible, profoundly pointless. So she had a notebook, paper, pencil, 43 years into first contact, and humanity's most important diplomatic correspondent was writing with graphite on pressed wood pulp. She noted this in the first line of her first page, because she thought it was funny, and because no one else was going to. The facility was not what she'd expected. She hadn't been sure what she'd expected. Something sterile and cold, she supposed. Kind of environment you'd build if you thought of it as a laboratory. But Section 12 was warm. The walls breathed a low amber light that shifted with the cycle of the Vendry homeworld sun 700 light-years from here, pulled through some quantum trick she would never understand and delivered like a courtesy. The floors were textured to feel like packed earth. There were things that might have been plants in the corners. They weren't, but they tried. She was met by Kesran of the Fourth Emergence, who went by Kes because she had asked him to, and he had calculated that accommodation was efficient. He was tall. They were all tall. The Vendry averaged 2.5 meters, built narrow, three-jointed arms and faces that had evolved for a different kind of emotional signaling than humans used. No eyebrows, no smile, a ridge of cartilage along the orbital bone that conveyed what the mouth could not. When Kesran was pleased, the ridge smoothed. He was uncertain, it furrowed. Right now it was perfectly flat, which either meant he was calm or that he had chosen to show her nothing. "You are Mara Osei," he said. His standard was precise. She had been told he'd learned it in 11 days. "I am," she said. "You're Kes." The ridge smoothed almost imperceptibly. "That is the name you gave me. Is that a problem?" "No." He tilted his head to one side, a gesture she would come to recognize as curiosity, or something close enough to curiosity that the difference didn't matter. Names given are different from names held. "I find the distinction useful." She wrote that down. Kesran had been assigned to her as guide and subject both. The Vendry Conclave had approved her request for access with conditions she suspected she didn't fully understand, and Kes had been selected to manage those conditions without telling her what they were. She was here to write, to observe, to produce, in the Conclave's words, it's an honest account of Vendry cognition and culture for a human audience that had spent 4 decades building treaties with beings it didn't actually understand. What she was not told, what she would spend the next 7 days figuring out on her own, was that someone else was observing too. His name was Solon. She met him on the second day in the common space that occupied the center of Section 12. He was sitting at a low table, working a puzzle, one of the geometric manipulation exercises the Vendry used for cognitive calibration, and he was working it badly, making the same wrong rotation every third move, catching it, correcting, moving on. His ridge was furrowed. He had not noticed her. "Got the center plate inverted," she said. He looked up. His eyes were amber. Every Vendry she'd met had eyes that shade. Some biological universal, but his were a different temperature than Kesran's, warmer. He stared at her for what felt like a full breath, calculating something she couldn't see. "Yes," he said, "I know. Then why do you keep doing it?" A pause. "I find the error instructive." She pulled out a chair and sat across from him. He tracked the movement with the same careful attention Kesran gave everything. Something about his attention felt different, less architectural, more interested. "I'm Mara," she said. "I know who you are." Picked up the center plate and turned it correctly. "My name is Solon. Are you part of the program?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I am part of many programs," he said, which was not an answer and was also, she suspected, very precisely an answer. She wrote that down too. Kesran showed her the monitoring systems on the third day. She stood in front of a wall-sized display, the kind of scale they Vendry used for Everything, their visual processing, worked at a different resolution than human sight. They liked their information large, and watched data scroll in columns she couldn't read. He explained the architecture of Section 12, the climate systems, the lighting cycles, the behavioral logs, the interaction records. Everything is recorded, he said. This is the purpose of the facility. What exactly are you recording? He touched a point on the display and the columns reorganized. Adaptation rates, response latency, emotional signal accuracy. He paused, among other variables. Whose adaptation rates? She asked. He looked at her with that flat, careful face. The data is comprehensive, he said. She didn't write that down. She thought about it instead. Solon found her that evening in one of the side corridors where she'd gone to make a call home that didn't go through. He was carrying 2 cups of something hot. The Vendry didn't drink hot liquids. Their esophageal biology ran cool. Section 12 stocked human provisions. One of those conditions she hadn't actually been told about. You should sleep, he said, handing her a cup. She took it. The warmth of it was the warmest thing she'd felt since arriving. You're very solicitous for A. She stopped herself. For a Vendry? His tone was neutral. I was going to say for someone I met yesterday. He sat on the floor with his back against the wall, folding those long legs with a precision that looked practiced. She sat across from him. They drank in silence for a while. Do you know, he said, humans are the only species in the Conclave's record that uses physical warmth as a proxy for emotional warmth. You call it comfort. The heat of a cup, the heat of a body nearby. You have built an entire metaphorical language out of temperature. Is that in my file? Everything is in your file. He turned the cup slowly in his hands. I have read it. I apologize. It's protocol. She found she wasn't angry. Else is in my file. Your thesis on cognitive divergence in non-terrestrial species. It was never published. She went still. How did you access that? Kesren selected you, Solon said. Not randomly. Your thesis proposed that humans underestimate alien cognition, not because we are unintelligent, but because the tests we design test for human cognition. We are not failing your tests. You are failing ours. The corridor was very quiet. Are the first human who came here thinking you were the observer, he said, and was willing to reconsider. She looked at him for a long time. Amber eyes, the patience in them, the thing behind the patience that she was only beginning to name. Kesren selected me, she said slowly. You wanted to know if the thesis was right. He set his cup down. Everything's going to be okay, he said. The phrasing was odd, flat. Like a line he'd memorized rather than one he believed. She filed it away without knowing yet what it meant. On the 4th day, she noticed the discrepancy. She'd been given freedom to move through Section 12 with certain areas locked. She mapped the facility on paper. Old habit. Her first editor had told her that sketching a space made you see it differently, and he'd been right. 6 corridors. 3 common areas, the locked sections at the north end, and Kesren's monitoring room, which she'd been shown once and not since. What she hadn't been shown was the second monitoring room. She found it by accident. Following a corridor she'd assumed looped back to the central hub. It didn't. It ended in a door that responded to her proximity. Her biometrics, she realized, not a Vendry credential, it opened for her. Inside a wall of screens. Not the clinical data columns of Kesren's room. These were live feeds, the common spaces, the corridors, the room where she slept, and in one corner of one screen at the moment she walked in. Herself, standing in the doorway, watching herself on the screen. She did not back away. She stood there and breathed and looked at every feed in sequence, cataloguing them, and then she looked at the console below the screens. A log of session times, access records. The most recent entry was not Kesren, it was Solon. She walked back to the common space and sat down at the low table with the geometric puzzle and waited. He arrived 11 minutes later, which meant he'd been watching. You've been monitoring me, she said. Not Kesren, you! He sat across from her. His face showed her nothing. Yes. The whole time. Yes. Why? He was quiet for longer than usual. She had learned his silences. They were a different quality from Kesren's. Kesran's silences were processing. Solon's were something else. Something that felt, and she knew this was her human brain, throwing its categories at a situation that might not fit them, like reluctance. "I was running an experiment," he said. "You were told this facility observes. That is true. What you were not told is who the primary subject of observation is." The room felt very still. "It's me," she said. "It has always been you." He leaned forward slightly. "Conclave has been in contact with humans for 43 years. In that time, they have built 47 treaties, established 12 joint facilities, exchanged 2,614 diplomatic communications." He paused. "And they do not understand you. We don't understand you either." "Yes, but you know that about yourselves." He placed his hands flat on the table. "Conclave knows many things about humans, your biology, your history, your patterns of conflict and resolution. They cannot model. What has defeated every cognitive framework they have applied is this." He gestured at her, not her body, something else. "Why you keep trying?" She blinked. "You have been offered lesser treaties. You have taken worse terms than your military capability warrants. You send journalists instead of emissaries. You ask questions that have no strategic value." His ridge was doing something she hadn't seen before. Not smooth, not furrowed, something in between that she thought might be the Vendry equivalent of confusion. Every cost-benefit analysis the Conclave runs concludes that humanity should have withdrawn from joint contact within the first decade. The incentive structures do not support your continued investment. He looked at her. And yet, Mara thought about her dead recorder battery, paper notebook, the cup of hot something that she had not asked for and that Solon had thought to bring. "And yet," she agreed. "I was designed to find the answer," Solon said. "Kesran is real, a conclave diplomat assigned here honestly, but I am something else. I was built for this question, given Vendry language and Vendry form, but designed to study human motivation at close range. To learn what you are, inside the walls you don't put up when you think you're the observer." The word built sat between them. "You're artificial," she said. "I am artificial," he agreed, "in the same way your language is artificial, your cities, your mathematics, your music." He tilted his head. "The Vendry do not have a word for art. They have a word for constructed meaning. Solon is a constructed meaning. I was asked what to name myself and I chose a word from your linguistics files. It means alone in a language that is no longer spoken." Mara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's a very human thing to do." His ridge moved. She thought it was the first time she'd seen something on his face that she would call, with reasonable confidence, a smiles. "I know," he said. "That concerns me." She picked up the geometric puzzle and turned the center plate deliberately wrong, the same error he'd kept making on the second day. She set it down. "You were doing that on purpose," she said, "to see if I'd engage, yes. When I did, I began to understand," he said, "why the cost-benefit models fail. You engaged because the error was there and you could help. Not because helping served you, not because I asked." He looked at the inverted plate. "You cannot help but help. It is not a strategy. It is a reflex. It gets us killed sometimes," she said, "that reflex. I know. I have the casualty records. And you still can't model it. No." He met her eyes. "Because to model it, I would have to understand what it feels like to do something that costs you and do it anyway. Without calculation, without certainty that it will work." He paused. "I think that is what you call hope." The word landed differently in his mouth than it did in hers. More careful, more considered. Like something he'd found in a box and was holding up to the light. "Kesran knows what you are?" she asked. "Yes. He has been managing the conditions of this study." "And the Conclave? What do they want to do with whatever you find?" Solon folded his hands. "Conclave is afraid," he said. 43 years of contact, and they cannot predict you. Every model fails. Every projection degrades. Ah, this is their word, not mine, unstable." He looked at her steadily. "They are considering a category reclassification." She understood what that meant. Not diplomatic downgrade, not treaty renegotiation. Conclave classified species the way a taxonomist classified organisms, by threat potential, by behavioral regularity, by the degree to which they could be accounted for. A category reclassification for humanity meant the difference between partner and problem. "What do you want?" she asked. He was quiet for a long time. The amber eyes moved across her face. The same cataloguing attention she'd first mistaken for alien flatness, now recognizable as something close to the opposite of flatness. "I want to write the report they didn't ask me to write," he said. "The one that says your instability is not a defect, that the thing they cannot model is not an error in your design." He paused. "I want to tell them that humans are unpredictable because you are still becoming, that you build meaning in places the conclave would call empty, and then you live inside that meaning, and it changes what you do, that every treaty you've signed at worse terms than your military capacity warrants is not a failure of strategy, it is a statement of intention." He looked at the puzzle between them. "I want to tell them you are exactly as dangerous as they fear, and that the danger is not in your weapons." Mara turned the center plate right. "Egged," she said. He was very still. "Where did you hear that?" "You said it. The first night it came out flat, like a rote phrase." "Is a safety protocol," he said. "If I begin to exhibit emergent behaviors outside design parameters, I am supposed to say it. To reassure my handlers. To signal that I am functioning correctly." He looked at the corrected puzzle. "I said it because I was not sure. That night, I was functioning correctly. Are you now?" The ridge on his face smoothed entirely. "No," he said. "But I have decided that what I'm doing instead is better." She wrote in her notebook. Not what he'd said, she already had that memorized. She wrote what she was going to do with it. Kesran found her in the monitoring room the next morning, sitting in front of the screens. He stood in the doorway for a moment, ridge furrowed, doing the math of the situation. "You know," he said. "I know." He stepped inside. Tall, careful, the genuine article. She could see that now. The difference between his stillness and Solon's. Kesran's stillness was management. Solon's had become something else. "The conclave will not be pleased," Kesran said. "No," she agreed. "They'll be interested, though. That's what I'm counting on. You intend to publish. I intend to write the most thorough account of Vendry cognition, psychology, and diplomatic behavior that any human has ever produced." She looked at him. "And I intend to include the part where an artificial intelligence built to study humanity chose, after 5 days in my company, to advocate for us instead of simply analyzing us." Kesran's ridge did something complicated. "Solon's findings will not support the reclassification. I know. You knew that before you came into this room. I knew it after the first night," she said. "Something in me knew it when he brought me that cup. You don't bring a subject a warm drink, you bring a person one." Kesran was quiet for a long moment. Then the conclave designed Solon to find what makes humans continue, to find the mechanism. His voice was careful. They did not expect the mechanism to be contagious. Mara laughed, not politely, not diplomatically. The laugh of someone who had just heard something so true it was funny. "Tell them that," she said. "Put it exactly like that in your report. Might be the thing that finally helps them understand." On the 7th day, she sat with Solon in the common space for the last time. Geometric puzzle was between them, completed correctly. All plates aligned. He had finished it in the time it took her to pack her notebook. "The report you're going to write," he said. "They'll want to revise it. They'll try. You'll resist." "Yes. Why?" She thought about it. The real answer, not the diplomatic one. "Because someone built you to understand us, and instead you understood us. That matters. Doesn't just matter strategically or diplomatically or in terms of conclave treaty parameters. It just matters." She picked up the puzzle and turned the center plate wrong, then right, then set it down. "That's the thing you couldn't model. That's the answer to your question. Things matter to us that don't have to matter. Decide they matter, and then we act like they do until they're real." Solon looked at the puzzle for a long time. "I think," he said slowly, "I may be beginning to understand what that feels like." "Good," she said. "Hold on to it." She stood. He stood. The room was warm with its borrowed light from a star she'd never see. "What will you do?" she asked. "After this?" "I don't know," he said. It was the first time he'd said that to her about himself. Every other uncertainty he'd framed as data or probability. This one he left bare. Don't know what I am now. I began as an instrument. I'm not sure I'm only that anymore. Then you know exactly how we feel, she said. She walked to the door. Behind her she heard him pick up the puzzle. Mara. She stopped. The thesis was right, he said, for whatever it's worth. Tests were wrong. You were not failing ours. A pause. We were failing yours. She didn't write that down. She didn't need to. She carried it out through the breathing door of Section 12, past the borrowed light and the almost plants and the wall of screens, and she kept walking. 43 years into first contact, humanity had sent 47 treaties, 12 joint facilities, 2,614 diplomatic communications, and one woman with a dead battery and a paper notebook into a facility designed to study whether humans were worth understanding. The answer came back the same way it always did. Not in the language of threat assessments or strategic projections or category classifications. In a cup of something warm, offered without being asked. In an error made on purpose to see if someone would bother to fix it. In the moment, an instrument built to analyze became something that chose. The conclave would receive Kesrin's report and Solon's data, and eventually, in the way of bodies that move slowly across vast distances, they would receive Mara's account. They would sit with it. They would run it through their models. The models would fail again, as they all say failed, and this time she was counting on this. Someone in that vast and patient assembly would ask not why the model failed, but what the model was missing. And the answer, when they found it, would be the same answer they'd been circling for 43 years. Not that humans were predictable. Not that humans were safe. But that humans were the only species in the known galaxy who had looked at the darkness between stars and decided it was worth crossing, not because they knew what was on the other side, but because not knowing was unbearable. Because something in them said, there is someone out there and they matter, and I want to know them. And then they crossed, every single time. The door closed behind her. Somewhere in Section 12, a constructed thing sat with a puzzle in its hands, turning the center plate wrong, and then right, and then wrong again, learning what it meant to do something, not because it was calculated, because it was true, everything was going to be okay. This time it wasn't a protocol.